The ring felt like a weight in his pocket, pulling down his every step. Even though he could feel it hitting his hip with each turn he made, Connor's attention was elsewhere. He was looking through the crowd of the fair, but he couldn't see her anywhere. They were supposed to meet at the pier at the edge of the grounds. However, Emma hadn't shown. Figuring she had been caught in the jovial crowd, Connor had pushed through the countless groups in search of her. He hadn't any luck, but his hopes still remained high. As he pushed his way through a group of teenagers in a cloud of scented vapor, he caught sight of a couple. The woman's eyes crinkled at the edges just like Emelina's, and the man had his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer to him. In the process, the dark-complected man dropped his popping pink cotton candy on the ground, but he didn't seem to mind it all that much. Connor's thin lips pulled back in a smile. Without realizing it, he stuck his hand into his coat pocket and his gloved fingers wrapped around the rectangular box. He had wanted the night to be a surprise, even up to the point when he pulled out the box. The cliché of getting down on one knee and popping the question wasn't his style. It was too obvious, and he wanted to take Emelina's breath away. He pulled his eyes away from the couple, searching once more for his beloved. For countless minutes, he searched the fairgrounds, which wasn't too large. After all, it was held on one block of pavement. Discouraged, Connor left the grounds, passing a father who held his daughter as they received tickets from the lady in the booth. The wind was stronger beyond the fair, the air colder, but Connor didn't mind. He had grown up somewhere with winds far colder. In fact, the cold air reminded of home, and it filled him with growing excitement. He was hoping that Emma would want to visit his homeland frequently. Leaving the towering fluorescent Ferris wheel and the rest of the rides far behind, Connor entered the streets of the city. As he walked, the sounds of carnival music faded, drowned out by the whistling of the wind. The lights were blinding on the streets. It seemed everywhere he looked, he got distracted by some store name spelled out in elaborate curling letters beaming in bright purples, blues, and reds. Some of the lights shone green, others orange, but most were purple. Visitors often referred to the strip as the Purple Paradise, where bright colors and vibrant stars collided. Connor could never figure out why the stars were so bright here. It didn't make much sense, but somehow all the lights only seemed to draw more attention to them. He allowed himself to be lost in the constellations for what seemed like minutes. One of Emma's favorite things to do was stargaze, and she had yet to fail at impressing him. She could rattle off each name of every star in the sky without a doubt in her mind, and the way her face would brighten took Connor's breath away every time. Her charcoal eyes seemed darkest in those times, reflecting the stars and providing their own twinkle. He couldn't explain the beauty of her eyes with his words. They were like a black hole, unexplored, mysterious, and all at the same time they were a force to be reckoned with as well as beautiful. Someone bumped into his shoulder, muttering an apology as they walked by, and Connor remembered his search for Emma. He continued to walk. When he'd seen no sign of her, he would look to the sidewalks beneath his combat boots. Every step he took antagonized him. She should have been at the pier. He should have been able to take her hand and dance with her to the carnival music there, and they should have been able to go on one single ride, the Ferris wheel. Connor closed his eyes, thinking of the moment. They'd sit, silent, and they would be at the top of the city. Nothing would keep them from touching the stars. He could picture Emma's round face, captivated by the stars. She wouldn't even notice him. She'd be lost in a moment of pure bliss, and she'd barely notice the box he'd give her. He had spent months planning it, all for her not to show up. He opened his eyes to see that he had stopped walking. Leaning against the window of a diner, which had long since closed for the night, he pulled out the box. He turned it over in his hands as if examining it, and anxiety pulsed through his veins every moment he looked at it. It was a simple rectangular box covered in black velvet, and a purple ribbon laced around it, tying the package in a perfect bow. His mother had helped him pick it out, along with the ring inside it. The ring had been a family heirloom, belonging to his great-grandmother originally, With each generation, new diamonds had been added to the ring. However, the ring was still fairly modest, seeing as Connor's family had never been wealthy, but they didn't need wealth. He gripped the ring's case in his fingertips, scared someone might run along and snatch it up, although he was sure he was only being paranoid, seeing as the streets were nearly deserted. A smile wormed its way over his freckled face as he remembered the stories his mother shared about the ring. For every generation, it had been passed down to a daughter, but his mother and father had 2 boys. His older brother wasn't much of a romantic, and his mother had seen that far before they had grown. Connor gently slid the case into his pocket, remembering how his mother would always tell him he wasn't like most. She had always told him to keep his large heart, no matter how much he got made fun of for it, and he had. He enjoyed the poetic things in life, and he wasn't afraid of his emotions, nor was he afraid to show them. Connor let out a sigh as he realized he'd been sidetracked once more. He pushed himself off the building and turned in a circle. Once he stopped, he found himself staring back at the fairgrounds. His eyes found the Ferris wheel as the wind whipped his coat around his thighs. Maybe he had missed her. Maybe she had been standing at the pier the entire time, and somehow Connor had overlooked her in all his excitement. He felt his stomach drop as he reached into his pants pocket and pulled out his cell phone. As he dialed her number, he turned back to the street, observing the tram that rolled by. His phone rang in his ear, and he muttered his wishes to the wind. Once the tram disappeared from his peripheral, the ringing of his phone died in his ear, and he sighed. Though he knew Emma hadn't picked up, he listened to the sound of her voice. He smiled as the recording told him she was sorry she missed his call, and that she'd be glad to get back to him if he left her a message. "Hey, Em, it's getting late," he said, taking a peek at his wristwatch. "I thought you said you were free tonight, and that you'd be happy to meet me at the pier. I just thought I'd let you know I meant the one at the fairgrounds. But I didn't see you there, so I'm walking the streets now." He paused, looking to the nearest street sign. "I'm currently on Lewis and 5th. I really hope I find you. I've missed you, Em. I hope you know A beep pierced his ear and made his heart drop. "Love you," he finished, tucking his phone back into his pocket with a sigh. Connor looked around one last time, hoping desperately he'd catch a glimpse of Emma somewhere. When he saw only a few people moseying around the walks, he decided to cross the street and keep walking. His excitement had waned, but it hadn't faded completely. An ounce of hope still resided in his heart, keeping his legs moving along the sidewalk. No matter where he looked, Emma wasn't to be seen. Concern started gnawing at the pit of Connor's stomach. Maybe she hadn't stirred him up after all. Maybe she had had an accident. Fear began to prick at his heart, and it began to race. Once the thoughts started, they didn't stop. Connor started sprinting toward Emelina's apartment, fear consuming him with each step he took. It took him 3 minutes to reach the building. He had counted down the seconds in his mind to keep his thoughts quiet, and as soon as he reached the building, he ran up and pressed the buzzer. When there wasn't an answer, he buzzed it again. By the 3rd time he hit the buzzer and there was no answer, panic began to bubble up in his heart. With no idea what else to do, he buzzed the lobby until someone responded. "Can I help you, sir?" a gruff voice said. Connor sighed in relief before he started rattling off his concerns. The man on the other line had to cut in and tell him to breathe because he was talking much too fast, and so Connor did just that. "I asked my girlfriend out on a really important date and she didn't show. She isn't picking up her phone either. I'm starting to get worried." "And her name, son?" Closing his eyes, Connor breathed in, not realizing he'd been holding his breath until he spoke. "Emelina Thornton." "One moment." The speaker crackled into static, and Connor's heart twisted in anxious anticipation. A minute passed in silence. Connor held his breath and laid his forehead against the brick of the building. His eyes fluttered shut, and as a comfort, he ran his hand over the box. It had been making him feel elated the entire night, but now it filled him with dread.